So the big question here, can you recover from chronic fatigue syndrome or indeed any form of burnout, even if you haven't got that far along the spectrum? Well, that's exactly what this video is all about. We're going to be looking at the answer to that question. Now, I'm Katie Dean. I'm the founder of Find My Energy, and I help people recover from chronic fatigue, burnout, and really just find more energy in life wherever you are on the spectrum of lacking energy. So obviously, when you are diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, you're going to come across a range of different opinions as to the likelihood of your recovery. And they vary from, I'm really sorry, there's nothing anyone can do, you're stuck with this for life, to, yes, of course you can recover. I mean, in fact, I am living proof that recovery is possible. I spent 20 years living with chronic fatigue syndrome, and I did manage to find a recovery path, and that's what I love sharing with people now. When I looked at the official statistics, the information is quite scant, surprisingly. You will find anywhere between 5% and maybe as high as 30% as predicted recovery rates. So that kind of begs the question, what is it that enables some people to recover and not others? So I'm going to break this down into two questions, and we're going to examine both of them today in this video. So the first question is around that piece of what allows people to recover. And then the second question we're going to consider is, what is it that prevents people from recovering? Why is it that there are so many people who live with burnout or fatigue for, not just days and weeks, but actual decades, possibly even an entire life? So let's come back to look at that first question. What is it that allows some people to recover from chronic fatigue syndrome, recover from burnout? Now, I find that interesting because for me, the reason that a lot of people feel like recovery is impossible is because they're looking for an answer in a very specific place. So they're looking from the perspective of, I've got something wrong with my body, what caused that to happen? And then, logically you feel like, well, if I've defined why it happened, then I can undo that problem and, get well again. And don't get me wrong, that is a perfectly logical way of looking at this. But we've been trying to look at this through the research for many decades now. And yes, I am in agreement with you. There has not been enough research. The amount of money that's spent on researching chronic fatigue syndrome versus the amount that is spent on a number of other illnesses is quite disturbing. But let's set that argument to one side and come back to this idea of, if there are people recovering, then how is it that they achieve that? Well, I discovered that the set of people that do recover and the set of practitioners that help them find their recovery path are coming to this from a different angle. So instead of asking the question of what's wrong, why did I get sick, they're flipping things around, and they've been studying what is it that creates energy in the body. So if you think about it, chronic fatigue syndrome, yes, it does come with a lot of illness, a lot of physical symptoms. There may be actual systems that have broken. But underlying that, the reason we're calling it chronic fatigue syndrome is it's chronic fatigue. Your body is lacking energy all of the time. So if we're saying that that's the fundamental problem, then what is it that is causing that lack of energy? So again, we can break that down into looking at it in a couple of ways. So the first thing to consider is, if there are a set of rules that your body abides by, a set of support systems that create energy, then what is it about your life, your lifestyle, that is blocking those support systems from energizing your body? And secondly, are there also, or instead of blocking, are there ways in which you are not supporting your body? So things that you could be doing that you're maybe not doing. So within that framework, we come at the chronic fatigue question from a really different angle. And we start looking across lifestyle and start considering that, well, one of the ways your body gets energy, just to take an example, is through the food that you put into it. Think of it like a car. If you drive a petrol car and you fill it up with diesel, the results are not going to be good. Or your body's the same. It requires food as fuel. So if the food that you're putting in is not good fuel, then it is going to struggle to feel energized. Now that's just one pillar of the various different structures that go in place to create a supportive, energized framework for your body. So I'm actually not going to focus any more deeply on going through all of those in this video, because as you can imagine, that is a huge topic in and of itself. And I'd like to save that up for another video rather than overload you with too much information for now. But what I want you to take away from this is that when we're looking at the question of how do you recover from chronic fatigue syndrome, the answer lies in how you're approaching your recovery. So rather than approaching it from a perspective of trying to analyse what went, what is wrong, what do I need to identify and change, you're looking at it from a perspective of how do I support my body, how do I create energy. And once you're creating that energetic environment for your body, it gives your body's natural healing systems a chance to come in and do what they do well. For some people, that is literally all that's required. For others, yes, in all of this process, there may have been other things that have gone wrong, actual systems that are broken, where you're needing to do a bit more in terms of focusing on healing a particular system. But that's something that you unfolds once you start getting this supportive, energetic environment in place as a foundational piece. You can start seeing where you personally need to go from there. So that's something that I am very keen on helping people to understand when they first come and work with me. We're looking at, are your foundations in place? Are you supporting your body to start healing, to start recovering? So let's put that to one side now and look at part 2 that I introduced in the beginning. So if we've said that there is a way of creating recovery, then the part 2 that we were looking at is, well, how come some people don't recover? Is it simply because we don't have enough answers? More research is needed, that sometimes systems are broken that we actually can't fix at the moment. And yes, I have to say that can be a part of the issue for some people. So I'm not sitting here saying that we have all the answers and offering a cure from chronic fatigue syndrome or anything like that. But I do want you to appreciate that we have a lot more answers than you may be aware of. And setting aside the piece where we need more research, I want to delve into another side of this question about why people don't recover. And it has a lot to do with, again, understanding. So if you don't understand what the recovery path looks like, then it's very easy to end up accidentally stepping off it. So that can be accidental self-sabotage. It can be not realizing that you are as far along the path as you actually are. Because one of the things that can happen quite commonly is you put a lot of really good steps in place, but your body's not feeling like it's actually moving that far forwards. So it's easy to sort of lose trust in the process, lose patience, lose faith, and just go, oh, it's no good. All those people who said I couldn't recover, they were absolutely right. I just need to give up and, make the best of it, or however you respond to that pretty terrible piece of news in all honesty. So, as I say, understanding the recovery path is really critical in all of this. And number one is understanding that it's highly, highly unlikely that you're going to find one thing that makes you better. Really, we're rebuilding an entire system here. So rather than thinking about looking for the magic pill, I want you to start thinking about building a structure. So think about if you were building a house, for example. I mean, would you lay the foundations and then step back and go, oh, that doesn't look like the plan. Okay, I must have done it all wrong. Let's rip up the foundations and just start building walls. No, of course you wouldn't, because you understand that there's a process for building a house which requires you to lay foundations, build rows of brickwork, add in doors, add in windows, put the roof on, etc. And that all happens one after the other. You're building on top of a structure. Now, if you're approaching your recovery from chronic fatigue syndrome by thinking that there is, one diet to eat, or one supplement to take, or one pill, or one lifestyle change, what's going to happen is that you find that thing that other people are saying, oh, this was amazing, this worked for me. And you'll find that a lot. There's a lot of people out there who are telling patients about this miracle that worked for them. And I'm not saying that that is wrong, but if you approach that with the expectation that this is the cure, this is the one thing, and you try it, and maybe you do feel a little bit better, or maybe it has no effect at all. I mean, if it has no effect at all, it could be that it's simply that isn't a piece that your body needs, or it could be that that piece is something that your body is not ready to receive at that point in time. So back to thinking of this in terms of a framework, of a structure, and having an order for doing things. It can also mean that you do something and feel some improvements and then stop improving. So for example, this happened for me in the very early days. I was very fortunate that someone put me in touch with a nutritionist early on, and they were able to identify a few food groups that were annoying my body and depleting my energy. So I simply cut those foods out of my diet, and lo and behold, within literally 2 weeks, my energy level had gone sort of from here to here. And that at the time felt amazing, because I was on, I don't know, maybe say 5% energy. So going up to 10% energy was like doubling what I felt. But once I got used to that level, it was like, oh, but I still feel really rubbish. And of course I would, because, if we're talking only 10% energy, that feels terrible. It just felt a lot better than 5% energy. But there's this thing where we sort of lose perspective over time. So after living a couple of months at 10% energy, it would have been very easy for me to say, oh, well, all those nutritional changes were rubbish. They didn't make me better. So forget them. And to have reintroduced all the foods that I'd cut out. I didn't do that, luckily. I didn't have a particular plan. I didn't have all this knowledge at the time, but just luckily for me, I recognised that those are helped, and I kept them in place. And I went and I looked for the next piece of the puzzle. But understanding that is really key. As I say, it would have been very simple for me to have just ditched those dietary changes and gone, well, I'll try something else instead. When in fact, the dietary changes really helped. They needed to stay. And yes, as happened with me, I brought in something else, and that took me another step forward, and another step forward, and another step forward. So that's a really, really important thing to appreciate, that you're not looking for the one thing. You're looking to build the system that works for you, and that timing can be critical in all of this. Now, the other big mistake that I see people making, and again, this is entirely accidental, so I'm really not sitting here saying that anyone is doing this deliberately. No one sits there keeping themselves ill or trying to self-sabotage. It's literally, if you don't understand how it's supposed to feel when you're healing, then of course you're going to feel like, oh, I've taken a wrong turn, and scared and back off. So this brings me to the other piece of the common mistakes list, and that is not appreciating what true healing feels like. Because we tend to think that when we're recovering, we're going to feel better and better and better and better, and it's going to be this nice kind of linear line that just goes up from, down the bottom here where we're feeling terrible to up here where we're feeling fantastic. And that is true. If you've got a cold, then yes, that process is fairly linear and probably only takes 2 or 3 days, maybe a week, who knows. but you can see it, and you can see it quite quickly in real time. Well, the thing is, when you're recovering from a chronic complex illness, there's a lot of different pieces that need to heal and resolve and work themselves back into an energetically working body again. And some of that actually doesn't feel good. So for example, if you have been living with a virus that's got kind of chronically trapped in your body, roughly what's happened is when you initially caught that virus, your immune system, for whatever reason, didn't manage to eradicate it. So that virus is happily sitting in your cells, using up the energy that your cells want to be using for themselves. Now, when you do something that makes your immune system kind of wake up and go, oh, hang on a minute, we've got a squatter sitting in here. That virus isn't part of us. That doesn't belong here. What it's going to do is kick it out. And what you're going to feel is the healing event that didn't happen first time around. So by healing event, I'm talking about things like getting a fever, having a runny nose, sneezing, coughing, vomiting. None of this stuff is pleasant. None of it is what we want to feel. And when that suddenly happens, we tend to think, oh my gosh, panic. This isn't making me better. This supplement or whatever I did that's caused this reaction, that was really bad. That's actually making things worse. And what you're not understanding is that, no, it's actually creating a healing response. How do you know that it's a healing response as opposed to something more sinister? Well, typically the healing responses don't last very long. So in some cases it can be just a couple of hours, maybe a couple of days, but it's not something that goes on and on and on and on for weeks and months. If that's what you're looking at, then yes, there is something new happening that needs investigation. And if you get new things happening during the recovery process, you do need to go back and, just get checked out by your doctor, because just because you've got chronic fatigue syndrome doesn't mean that all other things magically don't happen in your body. Anything else can happen. So just a reminder to people that don't assume, oh, it's just the chronic fatigue and ignore it. It can be symptoms coming up that, need some attention urgently. So anyway, we've just covered quite a lot in that point too. So let me just refresh what we've been going over. So remember, this second question that we've been asking is why some people don't recover. And the first thing I said is that, yes, in some cases there is a possibility that the science is lacking and we haven't got a solution to whatever problem that person is facing. But there can also be two other common factors. So the first of those is not understanding how recovery works, and so not understanding that you're trying to create a structure and layer different things on top of one another. And the other piece that we've just talked about is this piece about not understanding what healing feels like. So when you start to get symptoms come up, you try and squash them down again instead of letting them flow through and letting the healing actually take place and just trusting that you're going to feel better on the other side of it. So I hope that's given you a few pointers that are going to help you wherever you are in your journey, whether you've just been diagnosed or whether you've actually already been living with chronic fatigue syndrome for quite some time. The takeaways from this are absolutely yes, recovery is possible. You need faith, you need patience, and you need to understand the process that your body is trying to go through. So hold those in mind, and I wish you well on your journey. If you would like to work with me or find out more about what I share about my own recovery story and what I've learned from that, then please make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel, like this video, share it with anyone who could be helped by it. And you can also find an awful lot more information on my website, which is findmyenergy.co.uk. So thank you very much for watching all of this. I hope it's given you something useful to take away, and I really wish you well on your own chronic fatigue recovery journey.